She whispered, "Want to rehearse my lines, in private?" And in that moment, everything changed. The sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet rehearsal room as the door creaked open. He looked up from the script in his hands, his heart skipping a beat at the sight of her. She stepped in with an effortless grace, her presence commanding yet subtle, as if the very air shifted when she entered. Her name was Isabella, a renowned actress in her early 40s, known for both her talent and poise. It was hard not to be intimidated by her, especially as he, a young actor still finding his footing, stood there fumbling with his lines. She was exactly what he had imagined from the stories, elegant, assured, and beautiful in a way that didn't rely on her age, but on the quiet confidence that radiated from within. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and her makeup was minimal, accentuating the natural beauty that seemed effortless. She wore a simple black dress, which clung to her frame just enough to highlight her curves, yet didn't overstate the fact that she was in the room. Her eyes, deep and reflective, briefly met his, and for a moment, he felt both small and oddly seen. "Ready?" Her voice was warm but firm, the kind of voice that commanded attention without trying. He nodded, though his stomach twisted with nerves. "Let's begin," she added, her lips curving into a soft smile. It wasn't the kind of smile meant to put him at ease, it was simply the smile of someone who knew exactly who they were, who didn't need to impress anyone. The first few moments were awkward, as expected. He stumbled over his lines, not because he hadn't prepared, but because her presence was like a magnetic pull he couldn't quite resist. The air between them felt thick with unspoken words. She watched him closely, but there was no judgment in her gaze. Her eyes were patient, observant, taking in every shift of his body, every quiver in his voice. She wasn't just an actress, she was an artist, and it was evident in the way she listened to him. Every word he said seemed to matter to her, not as a director or colleague, but as a person who understood the importance of every small detail. When he finally got through his lines without faltering, she tilted her head slightly, giving him a small nod of approval. "Much better," she said, and the way her lips curled into that smile again made his heart race. There was no condescension in her tone, just an acknowledgement of his effort, a recognition that he was capable of more. For a moment, the world outside the rehearsal room disappeared. It was just the two of them, actor and actress, connected in that brief, fleeting exchange. And as she sat down beside him to go over the script once more, he couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than he was ready for. But for now, he couldn't ignore the undeniable pull between them. The room was quiet again, the only sound the rustle of paper as they flipped through the script. Isabella sat beside him now, closer than before, her body language open yet still commanding. She had a way of making him feel like he was the only person in the room, even though he knew she was probably used to this, working with young actors, guiding them through the ropes. But with him, something felt different. Maybe it was the way her eyes lingered just a bit too long when she glanced at him, or the slight curve of her lips whenever he managed to get a line just right. He glanced down at the page, but the words blurred. He had read the script countless times, memorized his lines until they became second nature. But now, with her next to him, the words didn't seem to matter as much. It wasn't just about acting anymore, it was about being seen, truly seen, by someone who had lived through far more than he ever had. "Let's start from the top," she said, her voice soft but commanding. It was the same tone she had used when she first walked into the room, the one that made everything around him seem less important. She shifted in her seat, pulling her script a little closer to her chest. "I'm going to need you to let the lines come naturally, without forcing it. Feel the moment, don't just say the words." He nodded, though his mind was still racing. How could he just feel the moment when she was right there? The way she leaned in slightly as they began their lines, the slight hint of a smile she gave when he stammered, the gentle touch of her fingers as she adjusted his script, each small detail caught his attention, and it was hard not to be distracted by the soft, almost magnetic presence she exuded. They moved through the scene, her voice smooth and measured, while his was slightly more hurried, more hesitant. She guided him gently, her tone never critical, always understanding. Every now and then, her eyes would flicker with a hint of something he couldn't quite place, an emotion he didn't yet know how to read. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by her professional composure. It was as if she was giving him the space to grow, yet there was a subtle undercurrent of something more, something deeper, that kept them both tethered in this quiet dance. The scene they were working on was one of emotional depth, a moment where the characters confront their shared past. She spoke her lines slowly, deliberately, her voice carrying the weight of experience. As he responded, he couldn't help but notice the way her gaze softened, just the slightest shift in her expression, as though the scene was affecting her too. His hand brushed against hers as they reached for the same page of the script. He pulled back instinctively, but she didn't seem to mind, the touch fleeting but not unnoticed. Her fingers lingered for a moment, brushing his with a quiet assurance. The air between them thickened, and though they were still rehearsing, it felt like something more, something that neither of them could name yet. "Good," she said quietly, meeting his gaze with a small, approving nod. It was simple praise, but it felt like an invitation, a quiet acknowledgement that they were sharing something beyond the script. He sat back, heart pounding, unsure whether to feel proud or confused. The rehearsals had begun, yes, but there was an emotional rhythm between them now that wasn't written on the page. Something he could no longer ignore. The room felt quieter now, the sounds of their rehearsals fading into the background as Isabella stood up from her chair, stretching her long limbs. The session had gone longer than expected, and there was a lingering tension in the air, one that neither of them acknowledged outright. Her movements were fluid, graceful, as she walked to the window, her back turned to him. The soft afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply watch her, the way her hair caught the light, the effortless elegance in her posture. It was clear that she was someone who had mastered every movement, every word. But even now, he could see it, the subtle vulnerability in the way she held herself. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something about her that drew him in. She wasn't just the actress he'd seen on screen, she was someone who lived and breathed every role she played, someone who knew what it was like to be both powerful and fragile at the same time. He cleared his throat, unsure of how to break the silence. "So, should we call it a day for now?" His voice was tentative, unsure if he should offer to leave or if she had other plans in mind. Isabella turned around slowly, and for the first time, she locked eyes with him, her gaze steady, intense, yet unhurried. "Or," she said, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "We could rehearse a little more. Just the two of us." His breath caught in his throat. He tried to play it cool, but his mind raced. The invitation was simple enough, but there was something unspoken in the way she phrased it. Was it just about the script? Was she suggesting more time together, away from the eyes of the crew? The room seemed to shrink, and suddenly it felt as if they were no longer actors rehearsing lines but two people standing on the edge of something unknown. "Want to rehearse my lines, in private," she added, her voice soft yet purposeful, her eyes still fixed on him. The words hung in the air, and he didn't immediately respond. He wanted to, more than anything, but his mind scrambled for a logical reason to decline. It was professional, wasn't it? Just more time to work on the scenes, to make sure everything was perfect. But something in the way she said it felt personal. Intimate, even. He could hear the subtle tone of her voice, the weight behind her words, and he realized that he had been caught in the quiet web of her presence. The chemistry was undeniable. He swallowed hard, torn between the hesitation of a young actor who respected boundaries and the undeniable pull he felt toward her energy, her experience, her warmth. He hesitated, but she smiled, a soft, understanding look crossing her face. She wasn't rushing him, but it was clear that she wasn't going to back down. The invitation was there, subtle but clear. The decision, now, was his. His pulse quickened. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. "Let's do it." As she turned to gather her things, he felt an unfamiliar excitement and nervousness mix inside him. It wasn't just another rehearsal. Something was shifting between them, and there was no turning back now. The quiet hum of the city outside was drowned out by the soft thud of the door closing behind them. The private room was dimmer than the rehearsal space, more intimate. It felt like they were entering a different world, a world where the lines between acting and reality were beginning to blur. Isabella had already set up a small table in the corner, with scripts and props scattered neatly, but there was something about the way the space was arranged that made it feel personal, almost inviting. He walked in, trying to steady his nerves. She had asked him to join her for a private rehearsal, and now, as they stood alone in this smaller, more intimate setting, he realized just how much that moment felt different from any previous rehearsal they'd shared. The air between them felt thick, alive with the unspoken energy that neither of them could ignore. Isabella gestured to the chair across from her, her gaze soft yet deliberate. "Please, have a seat. Let's go over the scene again, but this time, I want you to really feel it. Don't just speak the lines, let the emotions take over." He nodded, his pulse quickening as he sat down. The space between them was closer now, and he couldn't help but notice the faint smell of her perfume, soft and floral, lingering in the air like a delicate memory. The way she moved around the room, setting things up, felt effortless, but there was a quiet, deliberate focus to her every action. As she sat down beside him, the proximity was undeniable. He could feel the warmth of her body, the soft rustling of her clothes as she shifted, and the way she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. For the first time, he didn't just see Isabella as the actress he had admired from afar, she was someone sitting beside him, someone who made him feel as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. Isabella took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with a softness he hadn't noticed before. "This scene," she said quietly, "it's more than just words. It's about connection. About two people who, for a moment, understand each other in a way no one else does." Her voice was low, carrying a tenderness that made his chest tighten. They began the scene again, and this time, it felt different. There was no longer the awkwardness of just going through the motions. The lines began to flow with more intention, more heart. As she spoke, he watched her closely, noting the subtle movements of her face, the way her lips parted just slightly as she delivered her lines. There was a vulnerability in her performance that made his heart race. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and it was as if the world outside ceased to exist. The energy between them shifted, what had been professional just moments before now felt deeply personal. As he responded to her, his voice barely above a whisper, he could feel the intensity of the scene spilling over into their reality. The script had become secondary. What mattered now was the silent, unspoken connection that thrummed between them, each gesture, each glance carrying more weight than it ever had in the rehearsal hall. And when her hand brushed against his as she handed him the script, neither of them pulled away. The brief touch, though casual, lingered, and in that moment, everything about their connection felt undeniable. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. And for a second, he wondered if this was more than just a rehearsal. It felt like the beginning of something that neither of them could turn away from. The room seemed smaller now, the air thicker with unspoken words. They had been rehearsing for hours, yet it wasn't the script or the lines that were occupying his thoughts. It was her. The way she seemed so effortlessly composed, so in control, yet there was something hidden beneath that polished exterior, something fragile, almost human, that he wasn't used to seeing in the stars he had idolized from afar. Isabella sat back in her chair, her script resting on her lap, her fingers lightly tracing the edges as if deep in thought. She wasn't looking at him, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from a mutual understanding, a shared moment of calm before something more erupted. He wasn't sure how to break it, did he dare? What could he say? "I wasn't always like this," she said suddenly, her voice softer than before. Her words didn't come with the usual confidence, they were quiet, thoughtful, as if she was giving him a rare glimpse behind the curtain of her public persona. He shifted slightly, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the window, watching the light outside fade as the sun dipped lower in the sky. I was different when I first started out. I was nervous, unsure, always questioning if I belonged in this world. Her voice faltered slightly, the mask slipping just enough for him to see the vulnerability she had hidden away for so long. But over time, you learn to wear a mask, to convince everyone, and maybe even yourself, that you've got it all figured out. But the truth is, I still get scared sometimes. I still wonder if I'm enough. Her words hung in the air, raw and unexpected. He wasn't prepared for this side of her, the woman who had always seemed so untouchable. He didn't know what to say, there was nothing he could say to ease her insecurities. But there was something in the way her shoulders slumped, the tiredness in her eyes, that made him want to reach out, to offer some comfort, even if it was just in the smallest way. I think everyone feels that way sometimes, he said quietly, his voice steady but full of empathy. Even the people who seem like they have it all together. She met his eyes then, her gaze lingering for a moment, as if she were searching for something in him. For understanding. For reassurance. I've never said that out loud before, she murmured, almost to herself. Her lips parted in a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that was both sad and grateful, as though she had just let go of a heavy weight. In that moment, the space between them felt less like a rehearsal room and more like a shared moment of vulnerability. The quietness between them wasn't just silence, it was a connection, raw and tender, that neither of them had expected. And as they sat there, neither of them spoke again, knowing that sometimes the most powerful moments didn't need words at all. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from professional to something far more intimate. The script, once their anchor, had long since been set aside, forgotten in the quiet weight of the moment. The space between them was charged now, and it was impossible to ignore the subtle pull of gravity, drawing them closer with every passing second. Isabella stood up slowly, her movements deliberate, as if savoring the quiet tension that had built between them. He didn't move immediately, but watched her, his heart racing, his breath shallow. She walked around the room, tracing the edges of the furniture with her fingers as if lost in thought, but he couldn't help but notice how every small movement seemed to draw him in. There was an undeniable magnetism about her, a combination of strength and vulnerability that made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, yet irresistible. "Let's take a break," she suggested, her voice breaking the silence. "But we're not done yet." Her words, simple and casual, did nothing to calm the fluttering in his chest. He stood up from his chair, trying to act casual, though his legs felt like they were made of lead. The air around them seemed thick with anticipation, with something unsaid between them that neither was willing to acknowledge outright. They both stood for a moment, neither sure of what to do next. Then, without warning, she closed the distance between them. Her eyes locked with his, and for the first time, he saw something in them that made his breath catch. It was more than just professional interest or direction, it was something deeper, something that spoke of connection, of desire, though neither of them had spoken it aloud. Without thinking, he took a half step forward. And she didn't move away. Her gaze dropped to his lips for just a moment before lifting back up to his eyes. Her breath was shallow, matching his own, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. Everything around them faded, leaving only the two of them, standing so close now that the space between them felt like an invitation. Her hand brushed against his arm, a small, seemingly innocent touch, but it sent a jolt through him. His heart thudded loudly in his chest, and the room suddenly felt impossibly small. His eyes flickered to her lips, then back to her eyes, and there was no mistaking the unspoken question that hung in the air. The world outside, the lines they were supposed to be rehearsing, the professional boundaries, they all seemed distant, as if they were no longer important. And then, just as he thought she might lean in, just as he began to close the gap between them, she pulled back, her expression unreadable, though there was a faint flush on her cheeks. Her lips parted slightly, as if to say something, but the words never came. "I think we should stop for today," she said, her voice quiet but firm, her gaze dropping to the floor. There was no anger or frustration in her tone, only a quiet resignation. He stood there, stunned, his mind still reeling from the near kiss. Had it been his imagination? Had he misread the moment? Or was she pulling away for a reason neither of them had yet fully grasped? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as she gathered her things and made her way toward the door. He followed, his heart still pounding in his chest, unsure of what to do with the emotions he couldn't shake. Before she left, she glanced back at him, offering a small, knowing smile. "We'll pick this up tomorrow," she said softly. And with that, she was gone, leaving him standing in the quiet room, heart racing, mind swirling, with the sense that something was beginning, something neither of them could fully explain, but neither could resist. The rehearsal room was still, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning, a reminder of the normalcy that had returned after the emotional whirlwind that had passed between them. He stood by the window, looking out at the city beyond, his mind replaying the events of the last few hours, especially the near kiss that had left him breathless and uncertain. It had been a moment so charged with possibility, yet now, as the room seemed to settle back into its quiet routine, the reality of what had almost happened felt distant, surreal. Isabella had left shortly after, her gaze lingering on him one last time as she stepped out the door. Her quiet, almost imperceptible smile was enough to make him feel as if they shared a secret, one neither of them had named, but both understood. But now, in the solitude of the room, his thoughts became a blur of what-ifs and could-have-beens. He sighed and turned from the window, walking slowly back to the table where their scripts lay, untouched for the last hour. It was clear to him now that the connection between them wasn't just professional. It had grown into something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. But the question remained, what did it mean for them moving forward? A soft knock at the door broke the silence, and he turned to see Isabella standing there, her figure framed by the doorway. She hesitated for just a second, then stepped inside, her eyes searching his with a quiet intensity. "I'm sorry if she began, but he stopped her with a look. "No," he said, his voice steady but with an undertone of relief. "You don't need to apologize." She smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and understanding in her expression. "I didn't want you to think that we crossed a line." Her words were careful, like she was choosing them with precision, afraid of saying too much, or not enough. He walked toward her, feeling a sense of calm wash over him now. "It's not about crossing lines. It's about understanding. And what we both feel." His voice was soft, but there was a certainty in it now, something that had been lacking before. Isabella's eyes softened, and she took a small step closer, the space between them now just a breath apart. "We're both here because of the work," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "But that doesn't mean we can't acknowledge what's between us." The air between them, once filled with confusion and hesitation, now felt like a shared understanding. No more words needed to be said. What had almost happened, what had been held back, would now be left for another time. Their connection had been made, quietly, subtly, but unmistakably, and it would grow, when the time was right. Isabella reached out, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that spoke volumes more than any words could. They didn't need to say it aloud, the connection was clear. They were both ready, whenever the time came. And for now, that was enough.